Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this absolutely devastating polling that was featured on CBS Face the Nation. It was a poll conducted by CBS, and it essentially shows that the overwhelming majority of Americans, 62% of them, are now, at least in polls, saying that they are in favor of deporting everyone living in the United States of America illegally. Now, we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to explain to you what I think Republicans should actually glean from this, and Democrats as well. And also, it's not going to be the message that some of you actually want to take. That being said, I want to thank everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Among voters across all 50 states, former President Trump leads President Biden by 1 point, 50-49. But if we're looking at voters across the 7 states identified by CBS as the battlegrounds likely to decide the election, those numbers are flipped, and President Biden is ahead of his predecessor by 1 point.
So there was a CBS Face the Nation segment. It is going viral for a certain clip, although I will point out that it starts out by saying that Trump has something like a 1% lead in the national polls, although they argue that in the swing states combined, not in each individual swing state, Joe Biden actually has a 1% lead. That's what they lead off with in terms of this segment, and essentially what they're arguing at CBS, and I believe this to be true because I actually think the Biden campaign will prove to be stronger than it's presenting itself as it is right now. This election is going to be incredibly close. However, on the key issues, which should be indicators of where the country is trending, if not for the fact that Trump is a big personality guy and a lot of people will vote against him, even if they agree with him on certain policies based on said personality, it appears that Joe Biden is getting absolutely walloped. And one of the things that is a big indicator of that is immigration. And Joe Biden, let's be clear, he said that he wanted all these asylum fraudsters to surge to the border when he was campaigning.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
Now, that is exactly what has happened throughout the whole course of his presidency, and let's be clear about this. Joe Biden didn't give a damn about it, didn't do anything about it until it became politically expedient to do so, and now he's issuing an executive order, which, by the way, is polling incredibly well, in order to re-deport people when they come over the number 1,500 on an average daily basis.
Trump's been perceived as stronger on the border. Does this change anything?
No, Trump still is. More people think that Donald Trump's policies would stop or slow border crossings more than Biden's. Having said that, there is widespread support when we test in general terms for what President Biden just did. He gets 7 in 10 support on that. It's overwhelming among Republicans. It's also strong among Democrats. Look, context there. People have said they think that the border is in crisis for a long time.
Now, that order is incredibly popular because Americans are broadly in favor of immigration restrictions. And in fact, people across the Western world appear to be voting in favor broadly of the parties that promise to restrict immigration, although the problems in Europe specifically, in my opinion, have a lot more to do with Islamic immigration rather than immigration as a whole, which is a huge portion of the immigration that they're experiencing, and the negative consequences of importing cultures that are completely opposite to what European culture actually is. So I think that is in a little bit of a different category. That backlash is understandable for different reasons. The United States seems to be more upset about immigrants because we see all these different various people getting resources in major cities across this country while Americans are struggling. So this is more of an economic issue in the U.S.
But when people say that this contest is about a comparison between the two or a referendum on Joe Biden, Donald Trump does much better. And part of the reason he does much better is that Trump does better than Biden on a lot of these qualities, like being tough, being effective. Biden does better I'm being personally liked. I'm being compassionate.
Now, like I said, Trump kills Joe Biden in all these different various categories, except, of course, for compassionate, because Joe Biden tries to present himself as the most empathetic man in the history of the country. And Donald Trump, let's be honest, goes for the tough guy thing, doesn't show empathy for a lot of different people. So the compassionate category is actually understandable. And by the way, even though Trump appears to be winning at 5 of 6 or 4 of 5 of these categories, the fact of the matter is that compassionate shtick might actually work. It definitely worked in 2020 when Joe Biden was constantly talking about a missing person at the dinner table due to COVID-19, and Trump was telling people that it was nothing when he was infected with it. I think that was one of the big foibles of the Trump campaign in 2020, among many other foibles. But right now, the issues are aligning in Trump's favor, and a perfect example of that is the fact that he's talking about mass deportations, and CBS actually decided that they were going to pull the issue, and guess what? The overwhelming majority of the American people support the most extreme position, which is deporting all immigrants that are here illegally, although I do have some caveats for said poll.
You've seen the Trump campaign talking about mass deportations. We tested that in a general way in principle. Would you support a new government program that would deport all people living in the U.S. illegally? And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 and 10. It's strongest among folks who are MAGA. It's strongest among Trump supporters, but also from some Democrats as well.
So look, a lot of people are going to celebrate this. They're going to say that they've won the issue of immigration. But one of the things that I really need to break down for you guys, and honestly, I actually think the polling guy over at CBS Face the Nation really hits home on this, is that this is not to be taken literally. As we've discussed on this channel multiple times when going after the left wing, when they present top line polls as evidence of what the country should do, the devil is always in the details, and this is really more of an expression of the direction that America wants to go in rather than an actual tangible policy.
So what exactly do people think they're supporting?
Well, when you measure public sentiment on this, or really just about any policy, you're getting a sense of direction, you're getting broad brushstrokes, but those kinds of details, well, that's often up to the legislatures and the courts later on. We tested even the idea of should local law enforcement be involved in this? And a lot of folks do say yes. Again, the details of that, the specifics, you're not going to pick that up in an aggregate public opinion.
Because when you think about it, when the government starts, and by the way, this will never happen, yanking people out of their homes, sending people across the border en masse, you're going to have the media, you're going to have the Democrats, you're going to have all these different various groups of people and individuals calling Trump literal Hitler, and all the same tactics will be deployed as was deployed when he was president the first time, although in this scenario, he's actually deporting people at a high rate, so those will escalate. Remember kids in cages, remember all these different things, which, by the way, happened under the Obama administration, happened under the Biden administration, or are happening under the Biden administration right now, and then suddenly when it was Trump, it was evil, it was white, it was racist, it was bad. Well, guess what? All of that's going to come back, and in implementation, in reality, the mass deportation of all illegal immigrants is not going to happen. That being said, I do think you can move in the right direction based on the will of the American people, and I do not see this subsiding all that much before Election Day, even though I am pretty sure that the illegals are going to slow down in their entrance to this country leading up to Election Day. A lot of people are predicting that it's going to get much, much worse and all of that, but the fact of the matter is the cartels do not want this lucrative smuggling operation to be cracked down upon in the way that it might happen under President Trump. So they have an incentive to actually slow down how many people they're surging to the border, how many people they're smuggling to the border, in order to make it look like Biden's executive order actually did something. And the Trump administration, or actually the Trump campaign, my apologies for that, is kind of falling into this trap by predicting that we're going to get so many more migrants surging to the border, when in reality, forces beyond our control are working together to make sure that that does not happen. And those forces are the criminal forces of the cartels, who are making a ton of money under the current administration. That being said, if you start rejecting people at the border who are fraudulently and clearly fraudulently claiming asylum, that would be a big step in the right direction. You need to deter people from trying to manipulate the system by using this method, and the perfect policy for that was remain in Mexico. Now, I said this before, and I will say it again. The best policy that the Trump administration implemented, and again, this is not a partisan issue, it just made sense, was remain in Mexico, because you had all these different people who figured out through these various NGOs that the way to get into the United States of America was to say that I am seeking asylum, I am being persecuted, and all this other nonsense. But the thing is, asylum seekers are supposed to seek asylum in the next available country. And what we saw time and time again was that these weren't Mexicans seeking asylum in the United States of America. These were people from Central America and South America who passed through multiple different countries on their way to the U.S. in order to claim asylum here, because in reality, they were actually economic migrants. They were defrauding the system, and they still are. And now, under the Biden administration, we have all these different African immigrants that are also doing the same. We have Chinese nationals that are also doing the same. And the fact of the matter is, you can't have that. And it made perfect sense to do remain in Mexico. Trump ended up threatening the Mexican government with tariffs if they were going to just allow these people to pass through. So to a certain extent, we actually were able to limit asylum fraud under the Trump administration with a sensible policy that, despite what the courts claimed about it, how it violated the rights of these non-citizens defrauding the system, is perfectly sound and reasonable in every possible way. Now, another policy that I would actually institute if I were the Trump administration is that if you're one of these people that destroys or abandons your documents before you cross the U.S. border, no asylum claim is permitted. No immigration status will be granted, because what we're seeing over and over again is that these people use their passports in order to get into the nation of Mexico. Then they drop all their documents, claim a different name, claim a different age, and you can't have that. It's one thing for you to actually not have your documents due to reasons out of your control, but the fact of the matter is, these people are using their passports in order to get to Mexico, however they do it, whether they make the journey through Central America, whether they fly into Mexico from places like India, China, from Africa, and then suddenly they abandon their documents at the border. And the fact of the matter is, that should be grounds for an automatic rejection, because A, we want to limit the people committing asylum fraud. That is absolutely true. That is a goal of a policy. But a secondary goal, especially with the courts trying to make limitations on the way that we restrict asylum fraud by saying that they're legitimate asylum seekers, is we want to actually know who's coming into this country. We actually want IDs presented. So if you continuously reward people who don't have their documentation when they're at the border trying to defraud the system, that is going to lead to a bunch of different scenarios where people we definitely don't want. And by the way, we've already seen ISIS-K members being caught as high in the country as Philadelphia or as Pennsylvania, and they'd use likely these same tactics. So we definitely got to do stuff like that. But again, as for what was going on during the Trump administration initially, remain in Mexico was the most sound. And by the way, we have people on the left that actually agree with this. Anna Kasparian, of all people, was recently praising remain in Mexico.
The only thing Biden did is he came in and he reversed some of Trump's policies that were actually, in hindsight, not bad. Like the one thing that Trump did, now that I think about it, that was actually kind of helpful when it comes to immigration is, I don't know how he did it, but he convinced Mexico to agree to have asylum seekers stay there until their asylum claims are heard by judges in the United States. And then once their case is adjudicated, they either get to come into the United States or they have to go back home. But now you have an influx of migrants coming in the middle of a housing crisis, in the middle of this inflationary period. And yeah, it's going to impact Democrats in the polls. It's going to impact Biden in the polls. I just think he's been asleep this entire time and thought he could get away with it.
Now look, there's definitely a lot of things that the Trump administration did, and even on immigration, that I was not particularly interested in. In fact, there was a lot of promises that he made that he didn't appear to make any moves to deliver on. But the fact of the matter is, when you put out an objectively good policy and then it is ended by the Biden administration, and in fact, he ends up encouraging asylum fraud, and you see the disaster that we've seen over the first 3+ years of his presidency, even people on the left have to acknowledge that this just made sense. And their ridiculous reaction to this, claiming it was evil, white, and racist, and now you are hurting these desperate, sad asylum seekers who are obviously committing immigration fraud, was absurd in every possible way. Now, I will point out that obviously what we should aim for in terms of policy is to get the most recent people who have immigrated to this country out of this nation. And by the way, the CBS segment says, oh, but what about the children? What about the children?
To unpack that a bit, because this 62% of Americans favor deporting all undocumented immigrants. So Homeland Security says that President Biden has already deported or repatriated more people in the past year than any year since 2010. And then, depending on the details of what's talked about on the campaign trail, some of what Mr. Trump talks about could be illegal. It doesn't seem practical in some sense to round up children. And then we know that the courts have questioned whether local authorities would have the ability to do it.
And I need to make this 100% clear for everybody out there in the audience. The number one goal of the Trump administration, in my opinion, after deporting people who are actually criminals from the United States of America, is making sure that the children that are brought here are also deported. I do not want a policy that incentivizes people to send unaccompanied minors to the border. And even if you think it's too cruel or too sad or too mean to these little kids, the fact of the matter is making more kids or incentivizing more kids to take that dangerous journey to the United States border is more cruel, more mean, and more problematic for the United States of America. So the CBS guy's like, oh, it's really illegal to do this, and the ACLU is going to challenge it because how could we deport children? We definitely should deport children, 100%. We definitely need to do that, and I understand that they were sent here by their parents and all that, but we need to disincentivize this type of behavior because the fact of the matter is, it is incredibly dangerous to send children to the border in the way that all these different parents are doing who have good intentions, and in the way that the cartels are doing with obviously bad intentions. So yeah, the immigration poll numbers do not look good for the Biden administration. The fact that the overwhelming majority of the population is saying, and I want to emphasize, saying they're in favor of deporting all illegal immigrants is a positive sign for the Trump administration. However, the implementation of that policy on day one definitely should not be the goal. Again, wait till Trump actually gets in office if he wins election and he starts shipping out just the asylum fraudsters, how the polling will change, because very many of his sensible immigration policies that people are looking back on now and understanding how much sense they made were not looked at fondly by the general population at the time, even if the MAGA base was in support of them, and even if they're kind of no-brainers intelligent policy like Remain in Mexico was. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. And again, I want to say how you think about this, not how you feel about this, and whether or not you think mass deportations are legitimately good policy that will be popular, or if you believe that the policies that I've suggested, like the ID restriction and, of course, getting the first set of people out, the asylum fraudsters, would be a better tactic. All your comments down in the comments below. As usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the immigration numbers changing on Biden. Till next time.